for every $100,000 market value home, it's going to cost you an additional $70.
Thank you.
And just for the sake of, on the flip side of that, the income tax.
Yeah.
Say the 0.3% income tax, how does that impact people?
Sure. So I'll go right off my notes here too, and then I can address that question too. So, but from increasing, so the city of Kirtland has a income tax rate of 2%. If you were to increase that to 2.25%, that would generate an additional $819,000 per year. For someone with an annual salary of $50,000, that increase of that 0.25% would cost that taxpayer an additional $125 per year. If you were to increase the income tax rate from, and Councilman Rupel had 2.3, my estimate was based on 2.35%, so you would be jumping from 2 to 2.35. It would generate an estimated $1.147 million per year. Again, for someone that would earn an average salary of $50,000 per year, that increases around an additional $150 per year.
Not per house, per individual.
Anybody else from council wish to speak at this time? Okay, how about members of the community? Sounds like we're back on air here. Members of the community, would you like to come forward and discuss any of these options that we've put out there? It's a microphone so we can hear you.
Councilman Rupel, if you'd like, and I don't know if this was forwarded to, while the community's warming up here in the audience, I don't know if this was forwarded to all of council. I know this Ms. Donna Hopp from 7675 Joseph Street sent an email the other day, and so I'd like to read that into the record. I know the council, she mentioned that she was going to send it on to council, so while the community's thinking about, community that's here in person, thinking about anything they might want to add, I'll just read what Ms. Hopp said on Saturday, I think. I'm writing to offer my feedback on why choosing the income tax financing option is so necessary for most all retired seniors. Adding more money to our property taxes will require people living on fixed incomes to find more money they do not have. Not all seniors are healthy enough to go find work, which means they look to save it in other places like medicine, food, utilities, etc. Please consider voting to finance the roads through income taxes. Thank you, Donna Hupp, 7675 Joseph Street.
Yeah, I think I received that too. Thank you.
I've received similar from private conversations with residents, the same thoughts also, especially the retired people. Per the 17 million for the roads, and when we were talking about you front load getting the roads, and obviously if you're doing the 0.25% at 820,000 or the 0.3% at 975,000, that seems to be kind of the sweet spot now we're kind of looking at, is you're maybe doing $2-3 million worth of roads a year. So obviously you're financing that because you've got a slight delay also if this was to pass in November, and Lewis will be able to follow up on that. You don't automatically start getting 820,000 or 975,000 a year. How does that work? It rolls over kind of slowly. It's a 3-year till it gets full.
Typically takes about 3 years for that to fully come in. So just, keep in mind that, with that 2.25% income tax, the estimated yearly revenue would be around $819,000. You're never going to realize that in year 1 or year 2. It takes about year 3. So some projections that we've received from the Regional Income Tax Agency, you would get about a $200,000 revenue source in year 1, about a $500,000 revenue source in year 2, and then by year 3, then you're getting that $800,000 every year going forward. So it does take around 3 years with timing differences and filing tax returns for you to realize that full amount.
And to that point, with that 819 or 975,000 that you'd be getting a year. So obviously you'll see, if you look at you could go on the website, city website, and see all the 10-year plans. We've been posting it for the last 3 years, I believe it's the last 3 years. So you'll see that $2.5, $3 million spent in year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you sit there and go, okay, well, it's not 900,000. So hence, since we have this tax on there, we're able to finance this, and carry this out over generally, 10, 15-year loans? Is that generally how that would be, Louis?
15 or 20 typically.
Yeah, 15 or, okay, 20, because 20 years is the max you could do, because that's generally the lifespan of a road, depending how much work you do on that. So you'll see that if you look at the first 5 will be pretty heavy top loaded, then all of a sudden you'll just start to see it'll be down around 900,000, goes down to 4, or actually, for the first few, it'll be repair will be like $2 million, and then you'll have like 400,000 in maintenance. By the time you get to the end of that 5 years, it's strictly maintenance. And once this road plan is over, that doesn't quite end it. You still have maintenance going forward every year, approximately $700,000-$800,000, meaning basically after we complete this project, you still need to put $800,000 to keep your roads up. There's generally a rule of thumb of 10% of the roads a year you should address. That doesn't mean fix in our case, 65 miles, so that'd be 6 miles of road. So that means you put 6 new roads. That means you might put a mile or 2 of roads in, and the rest is maintenance, whether it's crack seal, micro seals, that kind of stuff. So, and Joe could talk a little bit more about the maintenance side of it.
Louis, the numbers that you're providing council, do those also take into account the delinquency rate? Are they netted out after delinquency?
Yeah, that would be what we would actually realize.
Thank you. And that delinquency rate, was that 6%? Is that what I
And the
recall?
6% was with the county for property taxes for the reduction factor. The delinquency rate, I don't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to pull that.
Just a couple other points that have come up, and we've had different faces here at some of the different meetings. One thing that our law director, Mr. Lotto, informed us today is, and I'll turn it over to him to explain it. For instance, if we did a 0.3% income tax increase, there would be a possibility that somewhere down the line that could be reduced by council if in fact we turned out that we were fortunate enough to have too much money. But could you explain that?
Yes, sir. So looking at our charter, right now it places a limit that council cannot impose an income tax of in excess of 2%. And then the next sentence says the council shall by ordinance levy a tax at the rate of 2%. What we can do is, if you come up with a number, say no income tax shall be imposed by council in excess of a percentage. And then the council shall by ordinance levy a tax not at a rate not to exceed a certain number. So what this does is it allows council to levy an income tax at that maximum rate. But if you find that you're overfunded and there's, you can reduce it, you don't need to change the charter to reduce it. It gives council a little bit of flexibility in reducing that and taking the burden off.
And I guess in a similar vein, another question I've been asked by a member of the community or members of the community is, so how that we would have language specifically by ordinance or resolution to ensure that the money would be used for the roads. For instance, it's not like 0.3% that can be used by the city for any need whatsoever. It would be by resolution specifically for a road program.
Correct. What you can do is you can pass a resolution now, or, at the time, saying, should this charter amendment be passed and council impose an increased income tax, this council hereby pledges to incorporate those funds to pay for a road program. So, I mean, it's a resolution. It puts everybody on the table, for that position. Obviously, any council can go back on that, but at least you're putting something as a body at that point, pledging to the community that you're going to utilize those funds for the road program.
And that would be easy enough to follow, because basically every year you can see what you bring in city income tax, which is our biggest source of revenue in the general fund. You'd basically be able to look at, we get year-end stuff that's actually on the website. You could figure what that 0.25% is, and we'll definitely be able to match it with the road funding to show, the residents that that's being spent for road funding. you know, whether it's roads, and that could be in, you know, drainage, that, there's drainage that's involved with the road repairs. We do drainage work, you know, ahead of time when we do a road, because if you don't address the drainage, then the road goes out a little bit faster. So that's part of the thing. It's generally drainage and roads. Is that correct, Mr. Fernando?
And 17 million includes the drainage projects?
Drainage for the road projects.
Right, not,
Correct. Not stormwater's totally separate, but whenever we rehab a road, drainage is always part of it.
And for that, that's when they're doing guttering or that kind of stuff for the road. Then we have separate road drainage project. I believe we have 3 on for this year that would be, aren't road related, but they do, you know, help in the neighborhoods. Crest would be a separate project, correct? For the road, for the stormwater management.
Correct.
I would say though that is road related, the Crestwood project, because, you know, if we're gonna go out and pave next year, right, eliminating the water that's coming underneath that road is important, and that's why we would do it the year ahead of time.
Correct, thank you.
Mr. Fenaro, do you anticipate buying any capital equipment with any new monies?
Road for this? No.
Just speaking, if the city was successful and the voters chose this plan, do we anticipate buying any capital equipment with this money?
It's my understanding this goes towards roads.
Thank you.
So, into that question, I think that's, you know, can be well delineated in any resolution and or ordinance, right? That commitment, that pledge to the taxpayers. But what we also know is we do have a $4 million or so lack of capital funding, and we've not had a capital funding plan for whether it's our buildings, whether it's our equipment, whether it's our fire trucks, whether it's our police cars, and we've kind of gone through the cycle of when we need something, we issue debt, we go out and get it. We haven't done that in a few years, but we need to establish that long-term capital funding plan. So in the last 2 years, this year we committed $400,000 from the general fund to support our road program. Last year, I think it was $200,000 out of the general fund to support the road program. Should we establish a well-financed road program, now that money that is coming from the general fund to go to the roads currently and last year, you know, now you talk about establishing a bona fide capital plan for, you know, the next 5, 10, 15 years out. So we can, you know, because today we're picking one or the other, right? And so when we had that established road funding mechanism, now we can go out and get what we need, make sure that our buildings are, you know, are being taken care of, our vehicles are being replaced at vehicles and equipment at the rate that they should be, so.
all right, are there any questions or comments from any members of the community? Come on up here, please.
Nick Angie, 8013 Gildersleeve Drive. Question for Mr. Slapnicker. Let's just say my annual income, including my wife's, is $180,000 a year. Our property is, let's say, $230,000. What am I looking at either way? And I would support anything. I'm just curious.
Well, you know, like I said, on a $50,000 salary, you're looking at a $125 increase per year when you go from 2 to 2.25. So if you extrapolate that, you know, even 4 times over to get to 200,000, you're looking at an increase of $500 additional per year.
500 additional. Now 4,000 of that, let's say, is in city. Does that make any difference?
Say that again?
Let's say $4,000 of that is in city money. Does that make any difference?
No, because with the tax credit factor, it doesn't make a significant difference. It might, I would have to, and I don't want this information, but what income was earned in what city, that plays into a factor with other cities' credit factors. So it's a little bit more complicated than that. So you would have to break your income down between where you're actually earning it.
So ballpark about 500 a year.
But just on a flat basis, a $500 increase a year. If you do have a credit factor that plays into it, it would only reduce that.
And
So,
that's for income.
income tax, yes.
Would
That's on
property be
200,000.
lower?
Yep. And the property tax, again, not based on your actual income, it's based on a market value home. So if you have even, let's say, I'll give you two options here. On a 4 mil levy, which would generate around $1.2 million in additional revenue to the city, if you have a $100,000 market value home, it's going to cost you $140 additional. Okay, and then you extrapolate that over. If you have a 2 mil levy, which would generate $635,000 in new revenue to the city, a $100,000 market value home is $70. Okay, a $500,000 market value home is an additional $350 per year. On 2 mil, yes.
So it ends up being cheaper for the property tax route, but the property tax route affects everyone.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of make it easier for the average homeowner / working person to understand, including me.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, if you have a $50,000 annual salary and we increase that rate from 2 to 2.25, it's an increase of $125 per year. And then you can just extrapolate that for every 50,000.
Very good. Thank
And
you.
then 2.35 is 175.
I understand. I'll do whatever I can to help the community, and whatever way it goes, you have my vote. I'm going to shut this off. I'll keep it on then.
Thanks, Mr. Angie.
Anybody else from the community?
John Lesnick, 9235 Regency Woods Drive. I've been in most of these meetings. I am certain I've heard it, but are we able as a city to borrow the same amount of money if we do a property tax or an income tax?
It's based on the revenue, the new revenue. As far as whether it's a property tax or an income tax, no. But again, that funding and that, that level of debt issuance is going to be based on the revenue source. So again, you could model it with a property tax levy where you're getting approximately the same revenue source as with an income tax. But as far as, whether it's an income tax or property tax, no, it's really based on the new revenue stream.
But the revenue stream for income tax would perpetuate forever. The tax revenue from a property tax would end in, I'm assuming we're looking at 5 years because I don't think anybody's going to do a 10, correct?
I mean, property tax, we have levies from the fire department that are from the 1980s that are continuously ongoing.
Is that what we're considering?
No.
I don't think so. We are.
Mr. Lesnick, as I started the meeting, the consensus, at least in terms of, no one's taken official votes or anything like that, is that we were primarily looking at probably a 0.3 or 0.35% income tax increase seems to be where we're heading right now. If I'm again, just sort of based on people's comments. Obviously, nothing's been put to a vote yet. But in fairness, that seems to be where we're heading right now.
Yeah. So with that, if you have that set up and it goes on forever versus whatever property tax levy generates the same amount per year but ends in 5 years, are you able to borrow more money with the property tax? The answer is no.
No, if there's a sunset
with the income
yeah,
tax.
Yeah, if there's an end date on something, then that's going to affect, the funding source, which would then affect what you can ultimately borrow.
So a 5-year property tax levy we wouldn't be able to borrow as much money as a perpetual income tax
No,
levy.
there'd be no way to pay it back.
Okay, thank you.
To clarify with Mr. Angie real quick, as far as the credit factor goes, I just wanted to look up a couple of my spreadsheets just to confirm. But with the tax credit factor, it doesn't really play into it. It does, but it doesn't. But it's still going to cost you $125 per $50,000. So as it's just really a flat amount.
All right. Maybe last call from anyone from the community who'd like to come forward with any questions or comments? How about anybody on council? Any questions or comments at this time?
I mean, we've had 3 of these meetings and I think we've got a clear direction on where we want to go. Now it's just figuring out that dollar amount, whether it be 0.3 or 0.5. So that's where I'm thinking.
0.35.
Stand corrected, 0.35.
He said it, not us.
Any other comments from council?
I don't need any more charts or diagrams or emails. I mean, we have more than enough information. I mean, I can't believe there'd be anything left to discuss. I mean, is anyone missing any information before they can make a decision?
I think we're all good.
Councilman Hamer, as I mentioned earlier in the work session, my concern was that, and asking Mr. Slapnicker to run some linear regression on what we could anticipate property taxes being in 10 income taxes being in 10 or 15 years. So we're not asking for far too much now. That's what I would like to see.
So if we get that sheet, are we done with numbers?
There's no
Just
way
a-
I can accurately, going out 10 or 15 years for income tax. I mean, there's too many variables. I mean, with commercial development or things like that, I mean, we can only really go off of historical. And, 10 years ago, we were at $3 million. We're at $4 million now. But we just don't know, especially with the work from home and things like that. There's really no, I wouldn't feel comfortable giving a 10-year, not historical, but futuristic look of the income tax. We just don't simply know what that potentially could look like.
Any other questions or comments from council? How about you, Mayor? Anything from?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll just kind of go through some bullets heading into this meeting. In the last 2.5 years, after this year, we'll spend about $3.3 million on our roads over last year and this year. We've talked about $16.5 or $17 million of current needs in terms of road funding. That's not new news. We've got $4 million in capital needs, whether it's buildings, fire trucks, service department vehicles, police cars. We know to fund this road program, and I know it's been mentioned before, that you could fund a road program with job creation. You'd need 1,000 new jobs making people making $50,000 a year to support the kind of road program we're talking about. So currently, that's not necessarily an option. I can't imagine 1,000 jobs turning up overnight here at $50,000. Now, that's not to say that economic development is not important in, going forward over the next course of the 5 and 10 and 15 years. It's obviously very important to this community, but, we can't count on that for a road program, 1,000 new jobs at $50,000 a year. We discussed, the options that could give us a reliable road program. I think when we get around that $1 million number, we start talking about a pretty reliable road program. The only question is it, we talk about a 3 mil levy that brings about $950,000 a year. We talk about a 30 basis point or 0.3 income tax adjustment voted on by the voters. In either case, the difference is with the property tax, the levy, you're going to have a sunset date, most likely, whether it's 5 or 10 years or 15 or even 20. And it doesn't grow. It pretty much stays flat. Whereas the income tax, a 10-year look back, was it, Mr. Smolak, 25, 30%? Again, to Mr. Slapnicker's point, you can't necessarily say that's what it's going to be every 10 years, but that there's going to be some growth. Historically, we're going to have some growth over 10 years. So as that number grows, call it 30 basis points, in 30 years from now, we're going to have well over $30 million for a road program. We can't say that necessarily with the property tax. So talk about that. Another point that we've all considered in this conversation is the property tax, a levy, affects all property owners here in the city, including, young, middle, the older folks in the community, businesses, whereas the income tax does not affect retirement income, Social Security, pensions, those things. So it's important to point out, and a a statistic that I just found earlier, and we mentioned in the work session, maybe at the beginning of this meeting even, the sound may have been off, but for the community's sake, Kirtland is the 10th most aged community here in this in the state of Ohio, number 10. And out of that, in that number, 22% of those folks are over the age of 65. That ranks us 12th in the state in terms of as a percentage. In terms of 65 and older, 22%. That's 1/5 of this community or more. So, property tax tends to affect those people potentially more adversely because they have those fixed incomes and those pensions, whereas the income taxes, the dollars are garnered from those of us that are still working and earning income. So important to point out, not necessarily just for the seniors in the community and fixed incomes, but I think also as we look at our Old Town community, sure we have, and we have some seniors over there that are, looking at, some significant property tax increases here. And, once that project comes online in 2026, I think the winter of is when that first property tax will be due, assessment on that. So that's important to yes, and we're trying to get, dollars elsewhere committed to those projects to mitigate that cost for those residents, but assuredly it's going to be more in property taxes for those folks. So, it's kind of as we all start coalescing around this idea of income tax versus property taxes, as though it seems, and certainly that's what I would like to see out of this, discussion. But those are the kind of factors and reasons why we're kind of moving in that direction, I think. A charter change to the income tax, it gives us that ability, as the finance director mentioned, the ability to do some of that, to front end load our road program, right? As prescribed by Mr. Courtney and Mr. Finaro, getting ahead, getting caught up, not getting ahead, but getting a lot of road work done in those first 5 years to finally get us caught up so we're not behind all the time. We're able to, with an income tax, you're able to do some debt issuance, some note issuances, and then ultimately roll that into a bond. And then in those future years, in years, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, you have that reliable, dedicated source of income and growing when it's the income tax, whereas the property tax, you risk that, 5 or 10 year drop off and the inability then because of that to do some of that financing. So I guess long and short is we're all trying to figure out the best way to implement a long-term road funding strategy. And, I will say, and I said this before, $400,000 was committed this year from the general fund to the roads, $200,000 last year. We've got $4 million for sure in capital needs around the city. Getting a dedicated source of road funding to move this conversation, to know that we've done what we had to do to finance to be able to pave the roads and pay for the roads. Now those general fund dollars that were otherwise committed can be committed to a real capital plan for the future. So we're not reacting and we're preparing for the future instead. So thanks a ton to not only council for great discussion, and to the community for whether it's the folks that have come and asserted their opinions or had their questions here in person, and the emails that we've received. Certainly out in the community, I've had plenty of great conversations with folks, and people of working age. I'll just say it, they tend to agree with, especially when you put it in the terms that we've put it, they tend to agree on that willingness, I should say, to invest more on the income tax side versus the property tax side, because they're considerate of that, that aging population, the retired community, the fixed income folks. So. It's been a tremendous discussion. I appreciate the community, all the work the finance director has done and continues to do on this, and certainly the service director and our city engineer, just to be able to get us to this point, to have something laid out for future consideration to get us back on track here in the city of Kirtland for our roads. So thanks to everybody. And if anyone has any questions for me, I'd certainly be happy to answer them.
Mayor, just one. We talk about the odds of maybe having too much money down the road, which I really don't feel will happen, but let's just, for instance, say it does. come year 6, after because we front loaded all this really heavily, but come year 6, can we make sure that there's an evaluation done again? Because not all council will probably be here in year 6, to make sure that the funds that are available going forward aren't exceeding what we need, or how we're going to allocate that so the residents know. I mean, the key to me is, especially on the income tax side, we're passing it for roads, mainly, to open up general funds to help feed our capital. But eventually the roads will get back caught up. I just want to make sure we keep that in front of us.
And I would suggest that, it's part of our budget process every year to be weighing that out and in that balance, right? Year 6, I think I can say pretty confidently, we won't have a too much money scenario because of all of that front end loaded. And, if our income tax revenue jumps that much in 6 years, it's a good problem to have. But like the law director had mentioned, there are 2 pretty simple mechanisms the council could implement to make sure that not too much money is coming in from our taxpayers. So it's a great point. It was a great point brought up by Mr. Scholes earlier, just in that kind of thinking. We want to make sure that our community, flat out and trusts in this government and what we're doing, and this open conversation we've had, and inviting the community out. And I think these are all, because of discussion like this, we think of things like that and have the ability to, prepare in the form of a resolution to dedicate the funds, to roads and associated drainage work that goes along with those roads, and then ultimately codify in our ordinances should the voters of the city say, yes, we agree with this charter amendment, or again, I'm saying that, but the levy is a potential, but I think, again, we've talked a lot more about the income tax.
And we can always make our streets made of gold too.
Mr. Lalo, and kind of to Ron's point here, I assume we could put in legislation. For instance, we already have, I think it's in the charter, I believe, that the mayor every year has to put forth a road plan. Is that something, obviously it'd be part of the budget process anyway, but is there a mechanism as part of the road plan to include, I guess, for lack of a better word, an accounting?
We could, that could be in the ordinance, as an ordinance. I wouldn't do it as a charter amendment. The charter, again, you don't want to conflate the issues or confuse voters if you're asking to modify or to increase the excessive rate, the excess rate of income tax. But what you could do is you can include a change in the ordinance to for the road plan, right? Whenever at the time of budget, the mayor must submit a road plan, which includes 10-year plan, et cetera, et cetera. Within that, you could also include something in the budget process where, however you want to word it, that there must be a discussion as to the funding of the road plan, or we could probably just tweak that ordinance, say, when you talk about the 10-year plan, feasibility, how's it going to be paid for? That's actually part of it. I'm trying to pull up the ordinance.
Yeah, the ordinance says not only what the funding is for that year, what the road plan is for that year, a 10-year road plan, but then also the mechanism of funding, at least for that year. And I can't remember if it goes on to say 10 years, Councilman Leslie, I kind of look at you because I know that you were helpful in that. But if it doesn't say 10 years, I think it's a great thing to insert, right?
I thought it talked about it, like long-term road funding plan. The mayor and council shall discuss funding mechanisms. So it's in there already. We could maybe put a little more specificity on it. And again, as I'm talking, I'm trying to scroll to find that ordinance.
23604.
That's no.
I just can't believe it would be a problem in the future. One bad storm, half of Wisner Road was taken out 2 years ago. Like this, I don't think this is a problem to create or worry about.
Yeah. So 236.12 talks about it. The comprehensive road plan must address the anticipated available funding Annually, the administration and city council shall determine the method and funding to accomplish the work set forth in the road plan. So it does already have those mandatory provisions where there really should be conversations had between administration and council about the funding and feasibility at that point, especially with the 10-year plan.
To correct the record, and I should have said former Councilman Lesnick.
Any other comments from council? Anybody out, general public, last chance? One.
Sorry, guys. I'm Bob Lesky, 8344 South Locust. I see the point of discussing this as an income tax rather than a property tax. To be honest, I think for my own heartfelt feelings, that makes better sense because everybody who is using and benefiting from our roads is paying a chunk of the change. I think that's just a fairness thing. And I can see some good merit there. I would be concerned about things being earmarked significantly to make sure that the funds collected are for roads. I mean, let's face it, I could justify a percentage of Bic pens and paper clips for City Hall to be part of the roads program. So I'd want to see to it that the funds were really concentrated in a correct fashion.
I think the law director can help us tailor that language to make sure it's not big pens and paper clips. But excellent point.
I guess the other side of it that kind of troubles me is that I would suggest that something is done about the decision-making process and how this is being accomplished, i.e. the roads program in general. And I know I've been silent. I haven't really said beans in all the time that this has been going on. I got a bad taste in my mouth from what the roads program did in front of my house. So, you know, I'm not real gung-ho here, guys. I just want to be sure that the funds get spent in a fashion that is truly foundational, because otherwise your maintenance means nothing.
I don't disagree. No, it's a good point, and it's a good point because when you talk about what's in front of your house and not being happy with it, you know, again, back to the last conversation, maintenance component. If we don't have a mechanism of funding for the future, you don't see that, you know, potentially that other inch or 2 inches of asphalt paving on top of there, giving you the road that you want that's comparable to what's across the street on Springer, right? So that's why this is so important. Again, not to rehash the last conversation, putting that application down to extend the life of that road was the purpose and intent. We won't be able to not only not be able to do that, but we won't be able to pave over that after we've protected that road. So it's that's why we're having this conversation, to make sure we can extend the life of our roads and then, you know, give a quality product to what our residents can benefit from and enjoy for many years and decades to come.
I guess what I was getting towards is that maybe a little house-to-house discussion wouldn't be a real bad idea. Some of these things. Certainly on Locust, I think we'd have chosen a little differently.
Well, and I said that. I said if I dropped the ball anywhere last fall, it was not coming to have a conversation with the residents of Locust to say, hey, this is maintenance. This isn't the final paving product. This is to save that road, extend the life of that road, and this is what to expect, right? And that's on me, and so I don't disagree. We'll definitely do a better job of that going forward.
I don't want to bring more up now. I'll hold till later. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else?
Actually, to a couple of his points were the finance part of it. Obviously, I kind of got in this job initially because I didn't feel we were watching the lockbox as much with the roads. I had to do a lot of figuring out my first 4 years, but We've got such transparency now with our go online and look at records and stuff like that coming during our budget process. You'll basically be able to, we'll know each year exactly what 0.25% brings in roads. And each year, you know, Mr. Courtney and Mr. Fernaro, if you look, they have a sheet, what we spent last year. It's very, very detailed. So you'll be able to match that up very easily. There's not a whole lot of hiding or putting $1 million worth of big pens, because you'll see it on there. Per Mr. Fenstermaker, the question on the 5 years, you know, I understand that's actually a good, you know, good concept, but a good example is the first 5 years we're going to do roads. We're going to have almost 12 to 13 million in roads in the first 6 years. We're only going to collect $6 million during the course of those first 6 years. So we really won't see that till probably year 13, 14, 15, if we start running in excess, or, you know, that starts getting out of balance at all. But to the mayor's point, during the budget process, you'll be able to see, you know, where we're at, you know, on an annual basis. So
Plus plan for higher interest too. It's just what it's going to, plus planning for higher interest too, because that's what's coming.
And I believe I said 6 years, because 3 years we're supposed to see the full amount. So at year 6, we'll have full year amounts for quite a few years to see where we're sitting.
I did forget one thing, I'm sorry. Councilman Lowry did let me know prior to the meeting that he supports the income tax, 25 basis points or more as council, and we determine out of this conversation. So I would have been remiss if I didn't get that in there.
Thank you. One more time. Anyone else? All right, hearing nothing. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
One more
Too
thing.
late.
So I guess it's, where do we go from here, guys? Right? We have a timeline. In order to put something to the voters in the fall, we know that I think, so 3 readings. And if we're leaning toward the income tax, and if that's kind of the that's the temperature I think we've taken and seen in here, are we discounting the levy? If we are,
Or
then
the other,
agreed.
not both.
So, okay. So do we want on next Monday's meeting to have the first reading of that? And that gives us 4 meetings then before the July recess, right?
Yes, and I could have that ready to go. It had to be ready by tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
you said we had 4 meetings, so best case would be this next meeting, but we have to have it on by the second meeting in June.
Yes.
Yes, so that's up to council if you want it on this one, or if you want need a discussion and put it on the second one, but we have to have it on by the second meeting.
Also, I would also make sure everyone's aware that you do need 2/3 vote of council for that legislation, because it would be a charter amendment. So in order to place it on the ballot as a charter amendment, you need, 5 out of 7 council members votes on that.
Nobody's on vacation, I hope, next month, are they?
Well, actually, as long as you have the members here for the second meeting of July at the latest, right?
Correct. It would be the third meeting, whichever the third reading is.
Correct.
And I think
then
there's one more
July-
meeting, the
The
11th.
week after then.
Yeah. So I will take the direction of council, however you want me to, if you want me to have it ready for Monday, or if you want to wait till the next meeting, I'll defer to my bosses.
We in the proper settings to do a vote amongst us type of thing? Just a hand vote? Yeah.
Yeah, you're in an open meeting. You could have honest discussion about any and everything. So
Well, the question is it 0.3 or 0.35?
I'm a 3.5.
I think the answer to that question could be, if it's 0.3, you can, after a little more discussion, you could always amend that to go 0.35, right? After a little bit more discernment and discussion, or you could start at 0.35 and lower it to 0.3 as an
discussing.
amendment to, well, and then what that does for you is if you do amend it, say at the second reading, it reverts back to first reading. If it was on the the agenda next Monday, it really gives you 4 meetings and 5 or 6 full weeks. So maybe that is something to think about. Going with one and having the ability to amend it, right, and have that
Why
full.
don't you draft for point,
I'm good with,
Were we discussing 0.3 or 0.3? I thought Lewis is 0.3, proper one, 0.35. What would your?
And it's just based on, the estimated annual revenue. So, the 0.3 would be around $1 million and the 0.35 gets you around 1.15, I believe.
1.15, so close to that 1.2.
Matt, any opinion?
3.5 is fine.
I'll go low, 0.25.
All right, I'm okay with 0.35.
I think it's 0.3 I think is where it's gonna be, but 0.35 is fine if you want to put it on legislation.
For
We get-
initial legislation.
we can
get the
amend
ball
down.
rolling. So you have some direction at least.
I'll have something drafted by tomorrow evening, so that when we have the next agenda released tomorrow evening, it'll be ready to go.
All right, I appreciate that. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion by Councilman Smoak. Is there a second?
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks,